When I think about the legacy of Jaws, that's one of the first things I think of. Is that like that's the first time that music that I learned music can evoke an emotion other than like the desire to dance. The among the other things that come to mind.
You want to dance to the Jaws theme?
Yeah, I want to dance my happy ass about the water.
You weren't doing the Cabbage Patch. Okay? You weren't doing the Cabbage Patch to the Jaws theme.
No, Chris. I'm getting out the water, and then I'm talking mess to that shark that he ain't get to me. Hello, and welcome to the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Chasen, and like always, I'll be joined today by the team that brings you cupofteacritiques.com. Here, we'll dive deep into the productions and topics we broach on our website so you can decide for yourself if they're your cup of tea. Ready for a deep look with a deep brew? This week's topic, happy birthday, Jaws. Cup of Tea Critiques is a family affair, and I'm here with my brother Chris, my mother Reba, and my father Terry. And fam, let's catch up. What have we all seen lately?
So your dad and I went to see 40 Acres a couple of days ago. Tremendous film. It's defined in IMDb as a post-apocalyptic film. And it stars Danielle Deadwyler, and it's directed by R.T. Thorne. It centers a woman who is trying to protect her family from a group of cannibals who have decided that they don't want to live off the land now that animals no longer exist. Instead, they want to live off people. And so she has isolated her family onto their farm, and they have armed themselves to the teeth to make sure that they can defend themselves against this group of people. Your dad even described it to some degree as a horror film. As a matter of fact, all of the previews leading up to it at the theater were all horror films. And I looked at your dad and asked him, well, is this a horror film? You didn't tell me this was a horror film. He said, well, it's kind of somewhat. And I don't know why he would take me to a horror film, because he knows I don't like horror films. And so I was beginning to get quite anxious. And 40 Acres had an awful lot of gory stuff in it. I wouldn't describe it as horror by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a very, very strong story and frankly plausible, to be honest with you, and a very, very powerful performance by Danielle Deadwyler, who, if she is not in the conversation for Best Actress nominee, I don't know what is wrong with the Academy. This was just an incredibly powerful film. Oh, anyway, I recommend you check out the film 40 Acres. Very, very good film.
Y'all left a messy trail, so make no mistake about it. They're looking for us. But what matters now is how we react.
Rain, you're on inventory. We need a full count of reserves. Medicine, ammo.
Yes, sir.
Cookie, keep an eye on those monitors. Manny, you, Haley, and I take inner perimeter.
How did they find the depot?
How they find anything? Other people. Watch your six. Shoot first, don't ask questions. We ain't waiting on no revenge. They gonna end up dead in a damn way.
My daughter and I actually went to the movies to see a couple of things recently. One was Lilo and Stitch. The other movie recently watched was the latest Mission Impossible movie. Two very good movies. Lilo and Stitch, the live action one, was very well done. It was a lot of fun, and my daughter really enjoyed every bit of it. She had a lot of blast watching it. It's really fun, family friendly. And then the latest Mission Impossible movie is awesome as well in its own right. There's a lot of suspense in this one, very good action sequences as expected, but I felt like better than any of the other ones. There was a lot more suspense for me with this one. So Belle and I both lost our breaths a few times. We were holding our breath several times throughout the movie because it was just, it had us on the edge of our seat for the entire time. It's good and very much worth watching.
You must be Captain Bledsoe.
And you must be out of your mind.
This week I went to see. I saw 2 movies. I actually had a double screening. I saw Bring Her Back, which is not, at the time of recording, this is not exactly new anymore, a new release anymore, but it is a horror movie about 2 children who go into a foster home, and the essentially their foster mother is trying to resurrect her deceased child through some very very, shall we say, unethical means. And it's there's a lot to unpack. It's not for the faint of heart. It is bloody, it is gross, it makes you turn your head. It's a grueling movie. If that's your thing, go for it, but don't go in and be surprised. Basically, it is a very tough watch. And I also saw Materialist, which is the new A24. I would call it a love triangle type movie. It's it's a romantic comedy of sorts, starring Dakota Johnson, Pedro Pascal, and Chris Evans, and it's written and directed by Celine Song, who did Past Lives, which everybody really liked a couple years ago. It's another kind of love triangle movie, and I thought that was interesting from the standpoint of Dakota Johnson plays a matchmaker, and she's torn between this kind of debonair guy that she meets at the wedding of one of her clients, and her ex boyfriend, who is a struggling theater actor living in New York with a couple of roommates. And so it's an interesting movie. It kind of talks about the kind of concrete things around, because she's a matchmaker. She's always talking about the math of things, how much you make, what you look like, and all these kind of concrete life circumstances, as opposed to the actual chemistry you have with somebody.
Are you hitting on me?
Definitely not. But I do think that you would be a great match for a lot of our clients. We need more straight men in New York City. You look about 6 feet tall. How much money do you make?
Just straight up like that.
I make $80,000 a year before taxes. Do you make more or less than that?
More.
I know. Finance, right?
Private equity. Do you want a drink?
Sure.
What do you want?
Coke and beer.
And so that's kind of the back and forth that goes on the whole movie. So those are just 2 movies. I would say, if you're interested in 2 very different movies, if you're interested in romance, there's one. Don't go to see Bring Her Back. If you're you're into just grueling horror, don't go to see Materialist. How about that? So those are 2 new releases that I got to check out this week.
This sharp, swallow you whole. Shaking, tenderizing, down you go. And we gotta do it quick. I don't bring back the tourists. That'll put all your businesses on a paying basis. But it's not gonna be pleasant. I value my neck a lot more than $3,000, Chief. I'll find him for 3, but I'll catch him and kill him for 10. And you gotta make up your minds. You wanna stay alive and ante up? You wanna play it cheap? Be on welfare the whole winter. I don't want no volunteers. I don't want no mates. There's too many captains on this island. $10,000 for me by myself. For that, you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
It's the 50th anniversary of Jaws, and people who weren't around to see the release of that film are nonetheless fans of that film and sharks. So that is something that's pretty amazing to me. It's similar to Star Wars in that sense.
Yeah. What I realized, that I don't really think I've seen a whole lot of shark movies. As I was kind of going through that, as I was looking through kind of, listicles and stuff, I was like, I actually haven't seen a whole lot of them. It was kind of a realization, even though so it was kind of a little bit on the subject of sports movies. I thought when we kind of talked about how there's less of them being released and they don't get as the same attention they used to. But and then what I said to that was I think a lot of people are consuming sports like documentary style, docu style shows that are coming out about quarterbacks and that kind of stuff. And I think similar to this, not that it's related to the popularity of the movies necessarily, but I think a lot of shark content people consume is docu-style stuff like Shark Week or Discovery Channel type stuff or specials that are about actual sharks or actual research on sharks. And so when we talk about why people love sharks or shark content, I don't think it's necessarily just about the movies.
Yeah, I mean, I got several movies that I list in here in terms of shark movies. Some of them I've seen, some of them I haven't. And Shark Week was the thing that came up because I remember your mother talked about a while back how we used to gather around the TV because Brandon was sitting there consuming Shark Week, and we would kind of get drawn into it and start watching.
Yeah.
And that was TV on the Weather Channel.
Yes. Chris, I think the reason you haven't watched a lot of shark movies is because, as we learned a couple of weeks ago, you like mob movies.
You know what?
There's space for both.
Chris, if you like mob movies, it looks like Deep Blue Sea 2 and 3 have to deal with a mob of bull sharks. The 5 bull sharks that are working as a unit or whatever. So you may want to watch more shark movies.
I mean, I don't know.
That sounds terrible, but anyway.
Does it sound any worse than Sharknado?
No, but it's like why 1999 to 2018? So no Samuel L. Jackson, no LL Cool J, no Thomas Jane. Like, all right, so all of the draws from the first movie are not there.
Well, spoiler alert for people if they didn't already know this. Samuel L. Jackson wasn't going to make it into the sequel. We learned him very early in the first.
It's kind of the point, though, right?
It's true. It's true.
Now you've seen how bad things can get and how quick they can get that way. Well, they can get a whole lot worse. So we're not going to fight anymore. We're going to pull together and we're going to find a way to get out of here. First, we're going to seal off this.
But all that being said, I want to go back to what Dad was actually bringing up. I had the same discovery, Dad, when I realized, first off, like most kids that watched a movie that was a classic and they had interest in it, and they realized I bit off more than I could chew, pun totally intended. Because I remember watching Jaws for the first time. We did it during the daylight, and I think Mom did that on purpose because she didn't want me to watch it at night and just be freaked out overnight. But then I made the wonderful decision to take a shower right after we finished watching the movie. So I kept looking at the wall thinking the shark was using its tail to try and break into the shower, just like he did into the boat. So, but what I found was Jaws grabbed my attention. And eventually, of course, I did watch Deep Blue Sea. But it really did spark my interest into these creatures. I mean, I remember watching Jaws, and then shortly afterwards, I remember I rented this National Geographic movie about like the first shark that they watched being born in the wild out of the mermaid's purse or whatever, and they showed the whole video and everything like that. And I was just super fascinated by all these things, and it grew into us watching Shark Week. And so I wonder if, to your point, Chris, a little bit, that people like to take this in more as a documentary deal and not so much as a movie venture. What I was surprised by from the articles is the number of people that are creating these movies that don't want sharks to be considered just man eaters. They want the conservation point of view.
It is really fascinating, though. I think sharks, I mean, I'm not an authority on sharks by any stretch of the imagination. But what I've learned about sharks is that they have the longest lifespan of any creature. That's one. And number two, there are certain diseases they seem to have a natural immunity to. They don't get cancers, for example. I mean, that makes them, fascinating to study. I don't think that study should be, invasive, and I'm not sure how invasive it gets. But it makes them fascinating creatures. And while Jaws and its, filmmakers get criticized to some degree, they get criticized for villainizing sharks as being ferocious creatures that prey on human beings. They have also, I think, brought to light the science about sharks.
Yeah, I mean, as we've already stated, like I really enjoy learning about the sharks, even after watching this man-eater shark go after everybody and thinking it was on the other side of the shower. But what I found was that there was so much to these creatures. And I think what a lot of people's fascination stems from is that because of these movies, we immediately understand the danger of their presence. Like they're strong, powerful, fast. They're not to be trifled with. It doesn't mean that we should necessarily always fear them, but respect the fact that like what they can do to us could be catastrophic. But my fascination was in what I learned after the fact. For example, understanding their hunting patterns. They don't hunt people. They hunt the movement in the water. But I remember watching once this pack of great whites in the North Atlantic or whatever, and there was a whale carcass. And you're seeing about a dozen sharks feed off of this blue whale carcass. And with each bite, they were talking about each bite is 35 pounds of whale. And that kind of stuff made me respect like their power. Like, holy crap, one bite and that's 35 pounds. And it was a feeding frenzy. It wasn't blood in the water. It was this big old thing. And they love whales. They were just, and feasting. I remember just watching and learning how they go about hunting, what they prefer to eat. You watch them come out of the water as they attack from below, and they'll take a seal in one gulp. It's crazy the amount of power these creatures have, and that's where my fascination continues to lie.
Well, it's and also, I mean, even though animal documentary people do kind of get drawn to documentaries about other animals and Nat Geo type content about other animals, but the fact that Discovery Channel has had this branded week of content about sharks for I don't really remember when it started, but they've done it every year.
1987, 88.
All right. So Brandon is the Discovery Channel expert here. Yeah. So my whole life, basically, every year they've had a week dedicated to this, and they can still do it, and it probably still draw some eyeballs. You would think at some point people would be like, yeah, whatever, like you've done this every year, I know what's new. But it's still garnered interest. So I think I think it speaks to a fascination with the creature, and I think to some degree that the people who will willingly engage with it despite the risk, I think we're maybe not equally fascinated, but we're also interested in the people who will go down and do dives in shark infested waters, or go down in cages, or want to study them, or do underwater photography of sharks. It just seems insane to a lot of us. And I think we're also interested in the mindset of those people.
I'm curious you guys' perspective on this. Like, what do you think the legacy of Jaws is when it comes to the movie business?
I don't know. I find it interesting, some of the things about Jaws that people either gripe about or whatever. They talk about imparting this notion that sharks are man-eaters and vengeful. And it's like, you know what? It's a horror movie. So they gave the shark this particular personality. Get over it. And if people actually took that and sort of ran with it to I guess, you know, to the point where they started hunting sharks, that is unfortunate. But I think, you know, to you all's point, these documentaries and whatnot should set the record straight. I mean, obviously, a lot of people watch those things as well, and they should garner from that, you know, exactly what you said, Brandon. They're reacting to movement in the water. They're moving into more shallow areas because of certain changes in climate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, Jaws, I think, kind of put sharks on the map as far as people going, maybe we shouldn't mess with them. But yeah, outside of that's pretty much the only thing that I think people should have gotten out of it, is that you should be wary. And last thing, and the sheer entertainment of the movie. I mean, it was quite entertaining. We watched it again last night, and it was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it, you know, but it was still scary and creepy.
Streaming on Peacock.
Actually, we watched it on Prime because we didn't want to watch any commercials.
Oh,
Facts.
gotcha. I think the legacy is just, you know, to what Dad's point was, a movie that changed the whole idea of a summer blockbuster. You know, one of the articles we were sharing with each other was referring to that the conventional wisdom was that only teenagers went to summer movies. So if you have a movie you think is a cash cow, release it in the winter, which now sounds insane, you know, and that was what people thought back then.
Yeah.
And so that the success of Jaws changed just the conventional wisdom around when a movie is going to do well. So that to me, that's the most impactful thing. I think, you know, getting back to the legacy of Jaws, it's just you know, film geeks especially, it's just a great movie that endured a lot of challenges in trying to get it produced, and it's by a filmmaker that is beloved.
When I think about the legacy of Jaws, I go back to when I saw the film the first time. It struck fear in me. I saw it at the theater, not on television. I saw it at the theater on a big screen, at least what was considered a big screen then, when it was originally released. And it struck fear in me. I was afraid to be in the bathtub. Even when I was in bed at night, I was afraid to get out of bed, for example, to go to the restroom, because I thought the thing was under my bed. Jaws made me afraid. And for years, your dad asked me to go on a cruise. Your dad has wanted me to go on a cruise for years. And I refused to go because I am afraid of large bodies of water. That is a direct result of seeing Jaws, and terrified about, you know, what a shark can do to a human being. So to me, that is the legacy. That is the legacy of Jaws. And I agree with everything you guys said about it being a great movie. And Terry, you even call it a horror movie in which they gave a shark a personality, essentially. And I've heard that description before. But it doesn't change how that film affected me. The other thing I think about too is, you know, on its anniversary now, they're re-releasing Jaws in theaters. And of course, I'm not going to see it in theaters, but I understand where people really like the idea of seeing it on today's big screen. And I don't know if they're showing it in theaters with kind of regular size screens, or if they modified the film to present on IMAX or what. But I wonder, had I seen that film then on the screen sizes that they have today, what kind of effect that would have had on me. And it had already petrified me, as we know. But, you know, what would it have done to me then? I wonder if I would have been in therapy for 30 years as a result of seeing that film. And I know you guys laugh, but that is what that film did to me. Maybe people just say, oh, you're being ridiculous. And maybe I am. But people respond differently to things. And I remember us coming downstairs, to your point here, and I apologize for being so long-winded. I remember coming downstairs and seeing Brandon, who could barely sit still for much of anything, actually sitting still and mesmerized by National Geographic program during Shark Week. And Brandon loved these. Every year he'd be watching Shark Week on television, and I couldn't get it. But I did sit down, to your point, Terry, I did sit down and watch these things, and I was always glad that I wasn't out there, that I was not out there. So when we watched the movie last night, what's interesting to me is it didn't scare me. It didn't frighten me at all. I thought there were things that were gross, seeing what happened to Clint and seeing how the shark did that. It was gross, but I wasn't frightened at all. I didn't lose a bit of sleep because of anything that happened in that film. So perhaps I've cinematically become more mature. I don't know what you would call it, but
do you still enjoy watching it though? Did you still think it was as good as you did when it scared you?
It looked dated to me. And I think that's probably what made it less effective as a film that instilled fear in me, because it looked washed out. The costumes were, from the 1970s.
We talk
Didn't
about
feel authentic. That's what I'm trying to say.
we talk about
no smartphones.
Yeah, I mean all of those things. Yeah, it didn't feel that way. Yeah, it didn't.
We talk about remakes of things, and I wonder, to your point though, with today's technology and better animatronics and things like that, I wonder what the effect would be on a large screen of a remake of Jaws.
So that's some of where I was about to go with it. My response too might be a little bit long-winded, but I'm going to come back to what Dad's saying now. But the number one thing for me with Jaws, so one of the first things I think about when I think of Jaws actually isn't the shark, it's the music. And I believe we mentioned this a little bit with the music podcast episode we had, but that music will last all time. It is always going to be present day to me. It will never be dated. And that's one of the first things, because that's the first time that music ever gave me an emotion. The first time that they do that sound with the shark in the water, you get the sense that there is danger lurking somewhere. You don't even know what yet. And this happens at the very beginning of the movie. So that's one of the first things. When I think about the legacy of Jaws, that's one of the first things I think of. Is that that's the first time that I learned music can evoke an emotion, other than the desire to dance. The among the other things that come to mind.
You want to dance the Jaws theme?
Yeah, I want to dance my happy ass about the water.
You weren't doing the Cabbage Patch. Okay? You weren't doing the Cabbage Patch to the Jaws theme.
No, Chris. I'm getting out the water, and then I'm talking mess to that shark that he ain't get to me. The among the other things too is, and Dad, I think you said this too, about the shark having a personality. And I laugh because in the process of talking about all of this, I looked up these sequels. And what came to mind is the fourth entity in this storyline. The last one that was made is called Jaws: The Revenge. And the simple idea that this shark has the desire to get vengeance for a dead shark from, at this point, 12 years prior. It was interesting, but that's even what it says here. Chief Brody's widow believes that her family is deliberately being targeted by another shark in search of revenge. And I had my mic muted because I wanted to laugh so hard at the idea that this creature wants revenge.
Tried to kill my father, man.
Right? Right? Ooh, you dirty human. So again, when I think about the legacy of this, it's the idea that this creature has a personality, and of all the things that it wants to do, it wants vengeance. Something that is very much a human trait. So it's funny to think of a shark wanting the same thing. So again, that's another piece of the legacy for me. Also, with the re-release of this movie, I would love it if they did this on IMAX, but I realized that IMAX for me is much more of a vertical screen than it is a horizontal screen. So I'm curious if it would make me feel any different seeing on there, if it would have the scary effects that I feel these other productions have had. And lastly, in terms of the legacy of this movie, I feel we see it in other productions on shark movies. Now, I have not seen Sharknado, and there's no way you're going to convince me to be terrified of a tornado because there are sharks in it. I'm terrified of this tornado because the dang thing could rip through the house. But open water. And the darkness that they had in several of those scenes, the fact that the attack is coming from below and they seem to be targeted, the angles that they use, that has a lot to do with it. And then the Meg is another one where, let's face it, the shark is huge. We understand that it's supposed to be a megalodon, but everybody watching it looks at the megalodon as just being an oversized Jaws. And so the way it hunted them out in the water, that's the legacy of Jaws to me, enacted in this movie, where they just replaced a great white with the great white's grandpa.
There it is. Oh my God.
Jonas!
It's coming.
We're slitting dumps up here, Jonas.
It's coming.
Can you hear me, Jonas?
Hold on.
Julian, we're gonna have to move. Give me your ear.
Jonas, we've got nothing left.
Almost nothing.
How are you gonna kill it?
Evolution. I'm gonna make this thing bleed. See, and what you said before, you were right. It's not about the people you lose. It's about the people you save.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, it's interesting. First of all, I want to double back to the music point because I think that's a great point. The music is I think almost before the movie itself, people think of the Jaws theme, and I think it just the intro, that beginning part of it, it brings to mind the idea of being hunted while you're engaging in this leisurely activity, and the fact that we could all be so unaware. I think that the other movie for comparison, I think, is just the Predator, in terms of just a being just very stealthily hunting you, but that didn't really have it did have a theme, but it wasn't playing during any of the Predator's attacks on people. And also the Predator isn't a real being. So it was an alien invented for the movie, as opposed to sharks are obviously a very real thing. I saw that to say, just think the intro to that theme just gives you the idea of being so unaware that something is coming after you. So I think that's why that the music is so significant. Mentioning other movies, Open Water was, I thought, pretty horrifying as a movie. The idea that you can get left behind on they were
going out diving. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, that's right. They were going out diving and the boat left them. Just as it's not even really a premise. It's based on a true story, but it's the idea that is just so horrifying. And I think the way they shot it was, kind of equally affecting, and then I think about the very end of the movie, they kind of show her point of view as she's bobbing there, and you see as her the camera kind of goes below the water, and you just see this swarm of sharks around her. And so I thought shots like that made that movie pretty terrifying.
Chris, they actually they used film from National Geographic to make sure it had the realistic feel of sharks in the water. So like they made it a point to integrate that into a few, not necessarily into the action shots, but when they were covering the sharks themselves, we're actually seeing real sharks as opposed to, a mechanical one like what was in Jaws. And they did it for the purposes of making us understand the realistic fear that went on at that time.
Yeah.
Daniel, did you just pee?
Yep.
You're so disgusting.
You said you were a little cold.
Daniel, was that a shark?
Maybe. Or a dolphin.
If it was a dolphin, you'd be on your way over there to play with it.
And I think so. So you have kind of, movies that feel kind of have a realistic effect, and then you have shark movies that go the completely opposite way, which I don't know whether it's a budgeting thing or is it's our appeal for this is that it's going to be so ridiculous, just kind of an intentionally silly movie. You have Sharknado, which is akin to Snakes on a Plane, kind of, where you just see it's just meant to be so ridiculous that I don't think a movie like that could really scare you. I don't think it could realistically scare you the same way. I see some still photos where you see a guy with a chainsaw and you see a shark flying overhead, and you see high-rise buildings in the background, and it's just so ridiculous that it's tough to think of a movie like that scaring you, even if it is really entertaining. So yeah, so I think the Jaws, and and the, like I said, one of the articles we looked at brought up how Jaws and Star Wars were supposed to kind of introduce this era of escapism, and that Jaws is actually it feels pretty real, at times, and I guess that's counter to what you were just saying about it being dated, but at the time anyway, it felt very real to people. I think, obviously the result of it, the popularity of it, and the way it changed people's behavior.
That music, and to you guys' point, it's classic, it's iconic, and it's funny because as I was reading through some of the trivia for the movie, they talked about when John Williams first presented it to Spielberg. He's like, yeah, so what do you really have for the theme for the movie?
Those two notes. Oh, yeah, those two notes.
Although I knew everything that was happening in the movie from obviously seeing it before, it still brought a certain amount of tension for me, regardless.
Yeah, didn't do it.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Is for me, the interesting thing about that music is, for example, I remember. So in addition to being a jock, I was also a band nerd, and I remember being in the band room, and my back is turned, and somebody is at the piano, and they play those two notes that same way, and instantly I remember like this tingle down my back that, hey, fear, their danger may be close. And that's what I mean by the legacy of that music, is that you can hear that in any other setting and you'll instantly understand, wait, there may be danger close by. And so that's, to me, that is the longest lasting piece of the legacy of that movie, in my opinion. I don't know if we got this down earlier or not, but the fear that it evoked for everybody, that movie in particular. I mean, remember, we talked about this on the previous podcast about how people were scared to go in the water as a result of this movie during that time. So there wasn't as much swimming going on, a lot less traveling to the beaches and everything was going on because people got afraid from this movie. We also read in the articles about the uptick in shark hunting as a result of Jaws.
Right. Yeah.
A similar thing happened after the release of the movie The Ghost in the Darkness, which was actually, it starred Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas. It was about two man-eater lions back at the end of the 1800s that were hunting humans that were putting up this railway. So it's based on a true story. But after that movie was released, I believe in 1996, there was an uptick in lion killings. And I'm bringing this up because movies like Jaws, I think, remind humans that it's very easy for us to no longer be at the top of the food chain. And that's what we can't stand, that thought that we can't be Earth's supreme predator, that we actually could have something to fear, and that we turn that into, well, now we have to hunt that to prove that we're the ones that are the apex predators. That's another legacy, I feel, unintended, but a legacy of Jaws as well, is that reminder that as humans, we never want to be below any other entity on Earth. Mom, you mentioned that it took Dad forever to finally convince you to go on a cruise because of your fear of sharks from this movie. And I have to admit, I had a similar fear about flying over a large body of water. Nobody wants to think about plane crashes. And in the interest of Final Destination being released, that's another thought that comes to mind is plane crashes. But I mention this because, you know, having the privilege to go to Europe several years ago, decades now, that was one thing that was on my mind. I couldn't sleep on that flight because I was afraid about the plane crashing in the water, but it wasn't the crash that concerned me. It was surviving the crash, surrounded by all that water and knowing that sharks were in there, that like I was in danger. That actually had me more afraid than the crash itself. So I had a similar fear as you did, Mom, about the large body of water because Jaws taught me to be afraid that sharks may come for me.
See? See what I mean?
Well, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. Thanks so much for listening and figuring out your cup of tea along with us. Honestly, we could go on and on like we do at our dinner table, but we look forward to you joining us again next week for another great discussion. Make sure you rate and follow the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And since Chris is out of the loop, make sure to leave a comment and share your favorite shark movie. You can stay in the loop on all things COTC by subscribing on our website at cupofteacritiques.com. You can also find us on Facebook, check out our Instagram at Cup of Tea Critiques, and on Letterboxd at COT Critiques. For Reba, Terry, and Chris, I'm Brandon. We'll see you next week for another deep look with a deep brew.